Welcome to the Well Child Show. The quest for greener pastures, quote unquote, is a valid innate need in every human being. But when such migration plans become irregular, and when there are children involved, the question becomes, what price are you willing to pay, or what dangers are you willing to expose your children to in this quest for greener pastures? You're welcome to another edition of the Well Child Show. I am Kemak Onyenaucheya, your host. Thank you for staying with us. I'm going to take a breather, and when I return, I'll introduce my guest, and we delve into the topic, children and irregular migration. Don't go away. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. It's the Well Child Show, and my name is Kemak Onyenaucheya, your host. I have with me in the studio today Tayo Elegbede. He's a media officer of the Migrant Project, and the Migrant Project is a social campaign on irregular migration in Nigeria with an end goal of helping people make informed migration decisions. Thank you for coming on the show today, Tayo.
Kemak, thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure.
This evening. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so talking about migration, especially when it has to do with irregular migration, can you enlighten us a bit about the major factors responsible for migration, especially as it involves children?
Yeah. Well, essentially, migration is just as old as humanity. And children that are very essential components of the social workings migrate most often for the same reasons that adults would migrate. And what are these reasons? Basically, economic empowerment. So poverty, let's just put it in the reverse method.
Okay.
Poverty is one major reason that has been adduced over the years why children would want to migrate. So for instance, if a child is in point A, location A, and is unable to feed well, to access the basic amenities of life, there is that high propensity that a child will migrate either on his or her own, or with the assistance of the parents, or through cases of smuggling and human trafficking. Of course, we'll look at these issues.
Yeah, that's a really big issue. The issue of human trafficking, and children happen to be at greater risk of human trafficking.
Absolutely, and of course, so moving away from poverty, I mean that's a big one. Culture also plays a very critical role. As you know, there are some parts of this country, Nigeria, where children are given out in marriage at a very early age. And we've seen cases where such children, some of them would run away from their homes because they want to escape that trauma, that very early age experience of marriage, because they're not well prepared. We've had experiences during our field work at the Migrant Project, and then we realized that we needed to counsel a lot of children because they ran away. They wanted to go to school, but they were unable to do that. And so that also keeps them at the end point of having to migrate. Of course, away from there, you also have cases of violence. Of course, you know, in some parts of the country as we speak, and globally, violence, war, humanitarian disasters, crisis, and all of that all happen within some spaces. So in Nigeria, for instance, we have IDP camps, and most of them would have migrated from a particular state to another just so they can be shielded. That's a case of migration. So while migration happens internally, it also happens internationally across borders. And so a lot of other reasons, of course, some people would also migrate because their parents are just moving and they just don't understand. And let's not forget that a child is just a child and wants to be a child. And they essentially would not make these migration decisions independently or critically, except when the issues of life have actually forced them to make this migration decision. So by and large, there are a whole lot of factors, but of course we can begin to look at some kids would also migrate because they want to expand their educational horizon. They just want better education, and they feel that where they are currently serves as a disadvantage point for them. So they need to move from one place to the other. There are a whole lot of reasons why children will migrate, but of course, as with adults, children also have different reasons. But the question is, are they migrating by choice or by force? That's a big question.
So is it safe to say that to a very large extent, the migration plans or migration actions by children are, as a consequence, you know, to some extent, on the migration plans of the adults in their lives?
I mean, very often we realize that children, I wouldn't even say that children make these decisions, but of course, like you rightly highlighted, the effects, these things run off from when the parents actually decide to migrate or not to migrate. Now, not to migrate, but you still find the kids migrate because they're unable to fulfill their childhood ambitions. When a child is unable to grow properly and sees an opportunity, or maybe one auntie or one uncle somewhere promises that, oh, you could get a better life somewhere, then that would definitely come through. And then that brings up the picture of the push factors, the things that are pushing them away, and then the pull factors. Of course, the push would mean that what is really chasing you off from where you are as a child, the family also plays a critical role. For instance, once a child is in a family system where there is abuse, where the parents keep fighting. I mean, for instance, this week I read of a story where a young lady narrated our ordeal that while she was growing up, she had to leave the house. Why? Because she had always seen her father beat her mother, and so she just felt, no, this is not it. I just need to leave it. It's a toxic environment. Again, and that's another case. And there are a couple of other instances where we've seen that children will just have to flee because they really can't fight. I mean, they're children. So these decisions, are they really making it by choice? That's
really brilliant. You know, you pointed out something that I know as a psychologist. Human beings are wired to either fight or flight. But in most cases, when children are faced with, you know, conditions that are not palatable to their living experience, most of the times they flight.
That's it.
That's awesome. And I know the Migrant Project is doing a great work in trying to educate Nigerians, especially as it regards to irregular migration.
Absolutely.
When children are involved.
Absolutely.
So we're going to talk a bit more about the effects of irregular migration on children, but I have a video clip that I want the viewers to look at right now. So if you kindly just play this video clip on the experience of irregular migration. We'll be right back.
Children are an important demography of any society. Just as any other age group, they are affected by the factors fueling migration issues globally. According to a 2016 report by the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, over 50 million children are on the move. By the Nigerian standard, a child is anyone below the age of 18, also known as a minor. Child migration is the movement of people under the age of 18 within or across political borders, with or without their parents or legal guardian. Child migrants often travel without legal documents, making their entry and stay illegal. Some of the commonest drivers of child migration include poverty, violence, war, and family connection. Globally, children account for more than 25% cases of modern slavery and human trafficking, many of which are results of child migration. Nigeria remains a major source, transit and destination country for minor migrants. The National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons, NAPTIP, reports that the average age of trafficked children in Nigeria is 15. Would you allow your 15-year-old child to travel without your consent or support? Due to their high vulnerability, minor migrants face gross risk, including exploitation, trafficking, smuggling, misuse and abuse, stigmatization, esteem, as well as emotional breakdown. The big question is, what can the world do about child migration?
You're welcome back. If you're just joining us, it's the Well Child Show with Kemak, and I'm Kemak Onyenaucheya, your host. I have with me in the studio Tayo Elegbede. He's a media officer of the Migrant Project, and this is an organization vested in educating Nigerians on the dangers of irregular migration, especially as it involves children. So Tayo, before we went on the break, we were talking about the effects and the negative impacts on irregular migration and children. Now, I want you to draw an inference on, the occurrence of child slavery, child prostitution, and selling of children to be used for child pornography. Can you draw an inference between these, negative occurrences and irregular migration?
Kemak, it really breaks my heart as you mentioned these things: child slavery, prostitution, pornography, and what have you. We are at a state in this world where values are falling apart, and individuals do not hold themselves responsible. Let me just speak with the numbers which we have. The International Labour Organization said that 43% of children in Nigeria are trapped in child labor. 43%.
That's a huge.
That's almost half of our population
of
children right here in this country. That means that the future is bleak for us as a people. We should not just look at these children as numbers.
It's getting worse.
It's getting worse. I mean, and this thing is because you don't go to register with the government to say, I'm taking this child for child labor or slavery or pornography or prostitution. But these are just the ones that were documented. The minimal estimate, let's say, that means that a lot is really worrisome. And that, of course, for child slavery, children, you find them doing all sort of works. And there is now a corporate structure to child slavery. Of course, you must have seen that children are being used as house helps at home. Yeah. And some people now glorify it, and then they say, oh, after all, I'm sending the child to a school.
That's true.
And then I'm feeding him and he's doing everything. And then there's a madam that gets a pay off that boy or that girl that's the house help.
That's really sad.
That's a case
and lots of parents and families would wish this away by saying, okay, we're poor, we're having, this economic hardship, so we're using these children in exchange to take care of the family. But it really is not the role of the child to care for parents.
Absolutely.
And then on the streets, there's lots of children doing, selling things, and I make it a personal principle never to patronize any child hawker on the streets.
Because if you do that, you will be supporting and promoting such acts.
Exactly.
So these are the very essential things. The values are really going out. Now, it also brings a question to what is the role of the family, of the parents, in actually taking care of the child. Because a child who has basic amenities would not think of having to go through. The child is not responsible for the family.
Exactly.
The family is supposed to be responsible for the child, but there's been a reversal of roles and responsibilities within our society. So while we look at these big issues from the global as well as national perspective, I think it's very critical that we look at it from the very smallest fundamental unit, which is the family. And then once you go into the family, we also need to talk about the individuals. What are you doing as an individual? What am I doing? Because it takes two to even start up a family. And so child slavery, prostitution, and pornography, these things are really bad and they're growing. But what can we do? We need to first appeal, because if you think that we need legislations for all of this, well, I think that there's little.
There are legislations.
I mean, there are legislations because we've seen it. But if people can hold themselves accountable, if our conscience can really speak to us, then, I mean, for instance, you just said you make it a point of duty not to patronize any child hawker. That's one of the things we need to do essentially. This is really worrisome. 43%, almost half of our children population in forced labor.
Essentially, we're raising children who don't have a childhood.
Who don't even have a personality for themselves, because these children then become adolescents and then you see them misbehaving. And I will just share a very good instance right now. So there was a child, a friend who's also a journalist, shared this with me on his radio show, and he said to me, Tayo, I got a call today and I was overwhelmed. So a young man called him, when he called him, he had 3 kids, and he said when he was growing up, that's the man who had 3 kids, when he was growing up, he moved from the village to the city center, and he was staying with one of his uncles. Sadly enough, the uncle molested him sexually.
Okay.
And then he ran away to tell an elderly woman in the church who happened to be a nurse. Now the woman also had an abuse, molested him sexually, and then at that point he just felt betrayed. I mean, you could imagine the trust reposed on the woman, and at that point he left the woman again, ran away, and was under the bridge in Elegbede, in Obalende.
Wow.
So for years he didn't go to school. Of course, he never had a life. Until after a couple of years, he then went to a church, and then he started getting console, relief, and all of that. He said when he was 35, he could not speak to a woman because his whole system was already messed up.
Yeah.
You get, and then he said his pastor actually gave him a woman as a wife.
Oh,
That's
wow.
your date. He has never said "I love you" to his wife.
It's a myriad,
it's actually
emotional and psychological trauma.
So how many of these cases are we going to breed? So it speaks to the fact that we need to look at these things very fundamentally from the very smallest unit of the society.
And it's great you mentioned about the global realities of irregular child migration.
Sad.
Can you throw some light on that?
Sad enough for us. In 2016, the United Nations said that over 50 million children moved from one point to the other. That's unaccompanied minors. And that's really big. Then the question is, where are the parents of this over 50 million? By 2017, it was already, and just to put this in perspective, because I don't like to use numbers to quantify humanity, we just think that they're just statistics.
Yeah.
That's the size. So currently we say Lagos is about 20 million people. Now look at Lagos.
We're looking at 2.5.
You get Lagos, you get now, that's quite, so it gives you a perspective. Now look at the internally generated revenue of Lagos and look at what the numbers can do for us. So it really expands a lot more. Now, why you think that the numbers are really huge globally, I would tell you that according to NAPTIP, that's the National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons, they did say that only 2% of trafficking happened internationally from Nigeria.
Oh,
and
wow.
75% actually happened within the states, across the states.
Okay.
While 23% happened within the states. So that means that while we think that a lot is happening globally, there's
so
a
much
lot
more
more
happening
happening on the inside. Of course, if you take a look at that, you must have seen the cases where NAPTIV have been pinpointing, we're doing this, we're doing that, and a couple of other agencies. Of course, we see them on the streets as well, the child hawking, the street label, and what have you. So that also brings to the fact that there's a lot going on. Apparently, we can then say that 1 in 3 migrants often would be a child. 1 in every 3 migrants would be a child. And this year alone, of course, a lot of people are moving. Irregular migration is quite big in Nigeria. And then you would see that from Nigeria, people want to go to Europe and then they want to go through the wrong routes. So from Nigeria to Niger and then deserts, and then it goes on and on to Libya and all of that. Do we know how many people die in the course of this journey?
Especially children.
Especially
because
children.
Even these migration journeys are really horrible.
Absolutely.
On adults. How much more children?
How much more children? Because for you to survive in the desert, it's a whole lot. A lot of adults die in the desert. How much more children whose survival rates are actually lower
than the adults?
Of course, this year alone, we've had over 1,000 deaths recorded on the Mediterranean Sea.
That's recorded. There's so much more that's not recorded.
So much more that's not recorded.
All right, Tayo. I want us to, get a balance in all of this. Now, we're saying, and I'm all for, not exposing children to the dangers and the experience of irregular migration. However, some families are having all sorts of socioeconomic problems, parents having more children that they can care for, and then there's the option of, extended family relatives taking some of these children in.
Yeah.
How do we reach a balance where, how do you talk to a family that's telling you the reality is we have so number of children, but we can't take care of these children? The only option is to, send these children away.
Yeah.
What would you say to those families? But hold that thought. We're going to go on a quick break. When we return, then the show continues. Please don't go away. The Well Child Show continues in a moment. Thank you for staying with us. It's the Well Child Show with Kemak, and we're discussing children and irregular migration. So, Tayo, you're welcome back.
Thank you so much,
Before
Kemak.
we went on the break, we were looking at how we can arrive at a balance whereby families that are having socioeconomic problems, who feel the only option is to give their children away, what advice would you have for the families?
I mean, you know, one of the things I usually say is personal introspection really helps. I mean, for anything you want to do in life, once you have clarity, you can be able to move forward. Same applies to advancing your socioeconomic potentials, essentially. So for families that are having these things, we cannot rely on our salaries alone. So that's why people say side hustle or multiple streams of income, essentially. We just need to be more creative. But there is something I've seen, which is our value systems are eroding too fast, essentially. So people want everything to be done now and now, nothing more. So once you start a business, everybody's asking you, Baba Fana, where the money? I mean, that's really, it begs the question of time. And time are seasons and what really make the difference for everything you do. So let's begin to get our values straight. Let's also look out for extra streams of income. I mean, you highlighted a very important issue there, which is overpopulation. I mean, at the rate we're growing in this country, if we do not put measure in place to really help us, I'm so sorry. Let's just keep it at that. I'm so sorry at that.
It's going to be an avalanche.
I mean, but what that means is people should be more responsible for the population control right now. I mean, you just have to live responsibly with population. The other point is this: we should look at ourselves and not just look at the government. The highest office of governance right now is self-governance. We actually elected the government into power, so we also need to hold ourselves accountable so we can hold them accountable. When that is not happening, then we will not be able to move so fast. Of course, knowledge also plays a key role. This is the age of knowledge, and knowledge is actually available everywhere. With a click of a button, the question is, what are you doing with your internet? There are loads of side hustles you can actually do, resources online that you can access that would really generate revenue for you. How much more are we leveraging that? It goes beyond just accessing Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. There are people making money on these platforms. Can't we join the league? The internet data is what will cause the fourth industrial revolution. How well are we positioned for it? So when you look at migration, I don't like to look at development problems or social problems in isolation.
Okay.
Because they do not stand in isolation. They're just a reflection of very basic issues that we're not dealing with. And we've come to the point in this country where we just look at things at the surface and then we think that we can solve them. So going deep down, it starts with the individual, and then from there to the family, and then to the small community, the power of influence. And then we go right up to the country.
So in essence, what you're saying is that parents must be able, first of all, this is an advice to people who are about to start families, have the number of children you could cater to, so that there's no chance that your child is exposed to the dangers of either irregular migration trafficking or quagmire, and seeking a solution. Giving away your children for child labor is not the answer.
It's just not it. It's just not it, because you would also not live to enjoy the kid. Children, essentially,
at the end of the day, their childhood experiences make them into the adults that they become. And some of these experiences that are negative leave really horrible tastes in the mouths of the children.
Horrible taste, to say the least. And of course, the nation is also at a disadvantage point for all of this. So we really would not get anything out of it. We just need to help ourselves go through those issues, essentially.
Okay, finally, Tayo, can you highlight some of the local context of child migration? I know you mentioned a bit about, the interstate and intra-country migrations. Can you give us a bit more, enlightenment?
So of course, there is a structure, which is there is a madam somewhere that has this group of young people she's willing to send off to different locations. I mean, that's a very clear one that we know around here, and it's just really appalling to know that even educated people also subscribe to these things, and they just pick up a call or to call their grandma and say, "Grandma, I need one pikin will go help me. This work too much." And then the woman goes to the village and says, "Oh, we'll send you. Okay, my child is in the city." And then that's one case. Of course, there are also some madam who would just pick up the child and then they promise the family heaven on earth. only to use a child for prostitution, for slavery, and then they even ship them off out of. A lot of Nigerians are stuck even within their own state, and they've not even seen kids, they've not seen their parents, family members, and you could imagine what that means.
The trauma.
The trauma, I mean, and then they are robbed of that normal growth process.
The childhood experience.
The childhood experience.
Which really is everything.
Is everything.
Because the sum total, I always say, like, childhood is like the foundation of every individual's life.
Absolutely.
Whatever goes wrong at that stage,
you take it off till possibly you're dead. It only takes you only have very light chances for you to remote. That's why when you see an adult who is misbehaving, you should know that the childhood,
something is wrong, right?
Exactly.
Wow. Thank you so much, Tayo, for being on the show
Thank
today.
you so much for having me.
I'm sure we're going to bring you back because we haven't even scratched the surface of this topic.
True.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me today.
Now, to my viewers, all that glitters, they say, is not gold. And remember, before you give that child away, before you're bamboozled into a false hope of utopia for your children and for their future, you need to remember, you need to ask yourself certain questions. What are the concrete plans, and the future goals that stand ahead of this child? What risk are you willing to expose your child to? There's so many cases of children that have been killed, delicate body parts and organs harvested, and all sorts of negative experiences that our children are made to go through. Before you send that child away to live with a relative, take all the time you need to find out what lies ahead of that child. It's always best for you to live with your children and for your children to live with you, no matter how difficult the situation may be. Thank you for being a part of the show today. You can connect with us on social media, popping up on your screen, on Instagram at The Well Child Show and at Global Child Health. You can log on to our YouTube channel to view previous episodes of the show. And for questions, comments, and training and speaking engagements, you can send us an email at info.wellchildshow@gmail.com. Thank you so much for being a part of the show today. And like I always say, I need you to remember, child health and safety is everybody's business. I'll be back on the same station, same time next week. Thank you and God bless you.